We are back on MorningLine. Clint Kelly, malpractice attorney, on with us this morning. We can take your phone calls if you'd like to join in the conversation. 737-7587. Question or comment about maybe a case you're dealing with or someone you know. Questions about the doctor or the hospital and whether things went right. Clint, as I said, has handled some incredible cases, the details of which sometimes are a little bit stunning. You've actually had a case that we can touch on now that actually went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Tennessee
Supreme Court.
Yeah.
You had to argue there. You know.
Right. It was
just on an appellate level, just kept being appealed?
Well, it was a jury verdict back in 2003. It was Mercer versus Vanderbilt. That's why when I hear the facts about Nurse Vaught's case, it brings back memories of that case that I had, because it's somewhat similar, where a patient came in from Linden, Perry County, by ambulance, and he had facial fractures from a car wreck, and they had to image his face to figure out where to do surgery to put his facial fractures back together. And he had all kinds of what they call delirium tremens. You know, he was a drinker, and when he wasn't drinking, he would get these shakes. And
seizures.
And so they gave him the same drug, becuronium. It's called Norcuron. That's another name for it. Paralytic. Hooked him to a ventilator, because you have to. You got to have some way to breathe for him, and you put him into a CT scanner. The CT scanning took about 45 minutes because there was a lot of it going on. Well, when they have him hooked to a ventilator, what you have to make sure of is you can see the patient's face, because if the patient's not getting enough air, their face will turn blue, and then you can intervene quickly and bag the patient, make sure the patient doesn't asphyxiate.
Because what you're saying, by beginning the paralytic, his lungs, he cannot breathe on his own anymore. He needed the machine to breathe for him while he was in the CT scan.
His diaphragm's useless. That's what allows you to breathe. The diaphragm expands the lungs, allows you to breathe, and contracts. And with a paralytic, it loses its function. So you have to watch the patient. Because that's the best sign, other than an alarm going off on the ventilator, that the patient's not getting enough air. And in my case, the nurse did not watch the monitor to keep an eye on the patient's face, and the respiratory therapist was on the phone talking to her boyfriend. And so this man was being scanned, and what we didn't know until right before trial, the respiratory therapist sent the ventilator with oxygen tanks that were only half full. So he ran out of air.
He ran out of air. It's not the machine did. He ran out of air. Gosh. Well, where was the appeal here? Well, I mean, how is that not open and shut?
Well, they argued the jury verdict was too large. It was a $7 million verdict, and they thought the verdict was too large. This is 2003.
All right, so the conviction was there, but they were, or not, I mean, you won, rather, and the money, they said, was too much.
That's right. And there were a couple of evidentiary issues that we had to take. So we went all the way up to the Tennessee Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court affirmed the jury award and wrote a long opinion about the case. So people can actually go, it's like I said, it's called Mercer versus Vanderbilt. That's the name of the case. And you can read the facts of it, and there are some similarities to what happened in Nurse Vaught's case. No, he survived. But he's a vegetable.
So he lost that much the air cut off to the brain, and he suffered brain damage.
Just enough to survive, but not enough to have any residual brain function. So unlike Miss Murphy, he didn't pass. The theme of the case.
Do you know, is he still alive today? Do you have any idea?
I don't know.
I don't know if you've heard from him. It was a while back.
Do you know what they said? He would die in 5 years, and he lived another 20. Almost another 20, I guess.
Almost another 20. It would have been, that's 19 years ago that happened.
Because his sister, who was the one that brought the lawsuit, she called us and told us that she was still providing care.
Well, he needed that money for the care.
Yes, he did. And he got great care and deserved it for what he went through. But he did survive, but it was terrible, Nick. And again, hospital system failures. It wasn't just a healthcare provider making a mistake. In our judgment, the hospital did not have appropriate protocols in place to prevent something like that from happening.
The thing I don't get about this, you and I, you know how you live in life, and you put yourself where you know you're in a dangerous situation, so you're extra cautious. If I was a nurse, I know there's all kinds of meds that they all have to deal with, but the moment I realize that I've given someone a paralytic for this purpose and its legit purpose, I am freaked, meaning I am going to realize that the only thing between this guy suffocating to death, and living, is me making sure this doesn't happen. I'm going to be so nervous that something goes wrong because he can't breathe on his own, then I'm going to watch him like a hawk for the entire procedure till we can wean him off the paralytic and he can breathe on his own. That's what I just don't get. I mean, maybe it's just you're so busy, but in life, you know, there's times when I've been in dangerous situations where when you're on this or you're on the edge of something, you realize if you misstep, you can fall. So I'm extra careful there, whereas other times I'm just walking casually. I don't worry about falling off the side of a curb. But if I'm on the edge of a cliff hiking, I'm really careful. How does people not realize you've got someone on a paralytic and you're on the phone with your boyfriend and you send up tanks half full? I mean, what the heck?
Well, you said it earlier about being busy.
There's no excuse. There's no excuse.
When they're performing their job and
unless they miss it and don't know it's a paralytic.
Yeah, well, when you do this regularly for a living, okay, you become almost a victim of your success. You believe that the systems that are in place and the way you do things will prevent major errors from occurring where a patient dies. And so if you've been doing something 100 times and it works, and you do it the 101st time and it turns out to be the wrong way and the patient dies, you look back and go, how did this happen? That's why we have, or supposed to have, protocols in place. Hospitals are supposed to have steps in place because you fall back on the protocol. And the protocols are what prevent people from dying. They prevent major medical mistakes from happening, but you have to have the protocol in place and you have to have enforcement of the protocol. Because if you just leave it up to the healthcare provider on any given day to ad lib it, that's where mistakes occur.
It's like going skydiving without a backup chute.
Exactly.
I'm just saying, if you don't have a backup chute, you are tempting fate, and once that one doesn't open, you're dead. You're dead if you don't have the backup chute. Whereas this poor guy, paralytic, and if you're not there, he dies. There's no backup. Have
you ever seen a Walmart procedure manual? The Walmart procedure?
No, it's huge, huh? Yeah.
They've got a protocol for everything. And I'm like going to the bathroom.
Which is probably to protect them legally, saying we've covered all our bases. But who reads all that?
They don't. But again, it's a way to train staff to follow procedures, because the idea, the mindset is if you have the procedures in place and you support the staff by training them and enforcing them, that will prevent people from ad-libbing it and causing errors or mistakes, like boxes falling off of shelves and hitting people. It's very similar in hospitals. That's why they need to have protocols, and the protocols need to be enforced.
Right. Okay. And you keep going back always to standard of care, of care. So in many of the cases, this may be for some of our viewers who may have a case they're thinking about, they don't raise to the level of necessarily what you just described, this awful case, the Mercer case.
Right.
But usually when you start investigating these cases, does it come down to is it the file that gives you the information you need? Is it interviews with nurses or doctors that gives you the information you need? Because keep in mind, you're coming from the outside in, and then you talk about the potential for cover-ups after this Vought case. Where do you get the information that makes your case?
I get the medical chart first.
Okay.
That's the alpha and omega of it, if you will. And then once I get the chart, my expert looks at it, or experts, depending on how many I need, and they look at the chart, and then they tell me, Clint, this is what happened medically, and this is why it happened. And then they tell me, here are the areas that you need to investigate, here are the witnesses who you need to depose, and then I craft a theory for how to prosecute the case and how to do discovery. That's the legal word for going out and finding facts, searching for what the facts are, so you know, basically you can assess the case. And there are two things that can happen. Either we agree on what the facts or the disputes are, and then we can settle the case, which happens most of the time, or the facts are so heavily disputed that we just can't come to an agreement and say, well, jury's going to have to going to have to resolve this.
Right.
It just depends on those two things. But it always starts with the medical chart and our experts, a physician, a nurse, life care planner, someone who looks over those records and says, here were the mistakes, this is why it caused the death or injury.
And how do you decide whether or not you move forward to litigate or not?
Well,
to courtroom.
Yeah, if you can't get to the right amount of money.
Okay, so that's basically what it comes into. You start negotiating, and either they negotiate with you, or maybe they say, to heck, we'll see you in court.
Right.
Most of the time there's some negotiations, but you just get some offer that's absurd.
Yeah, very rarely is there a no negotiation position. You're almost always negotiating at some point. The question is, some lawyers will just take whatever they can get.
Yeah.
Other lawyers, and I hope I consider myself one of them, I have a price that I think is reasonable to settle the case, or a range that my client and I have come to. And if the hospital and its insurance company will pay that amount of money, I'll settle the case. If they won't or don't, that's when you go to trial.
Right. Do you deal with does the hospital have its own team of attorneys, or are you dealing with attorneys that represent the insurance that represents the hospital.
Yeah. Vanderbilt, for example, they have their own firms that they go to represent them.
Okay. But and then with the insurance, does the insurance company then provide their own, or is the insurance company just paying for those lawyers to do the representation?
Vanderbilt's self-insured.
Okay.
Okay, but and most hospital chains are now. I think Ascension's self-insured.
Okay.
A lot of them are big enough and have enough money where they can actually insure themselves. There are still some hospital chains that have insurance, but there are very few of them. So each of these hospital chains, they have their own group of lawyers, their own firms that they send these cases out to defend their conduct.
Take a break on that note, and we come back our final segment with Clint Kelly right after this. That's interesting how that works.